Labour's plan for cutting the winter fuel payment was backed by MPs this week, but at what cost? Will it permanently damage Labour in the eyes of pensioners? And will it harm Anas Sarwar's chances of becoming the next First Minister? Also, talks are ongoing about the Commonwealth Games coming to Glasgow. But is it really worth it? Shouldn't we be spending money on protecting services and jobs? This is Planet Holyrood.
We will never turn our back on a single Scot.
We've got to wrestle with those challenges.
This is our country. Let's fix it together.
I was furious to hear about these things.
So I'm joined this week by John Ferguson of the Sunday Mail and Douglas Dickie of the Scottish Daily Express. We all know what the main story this week was. There was a vote at Westminster on the winter fuel payment. Labour are planning to cut the payment to about, I think, is it 10 million, 9 million pensioners? And in north of the border, that will affect up to 900,000 Scots as well. Keir Starmer's government, they won the vote easily given their massive majority, but political dangers remain. Now, put aside whether you think it's right or wrong, we've got energy prices are going up, MPs' inboxes are becoming full with angry pensioners demanding to know why they voted a certain way. It doesn't take a genius, I think, to work out that this is something that could blow up badly in Keir Starmer's face in the months ahead.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think it's a strange benefit in the sense that, as you mentioned, 10 million people received it, while there will be a portion of those pensioners that really need it. I think the feeling was that there was a huge amount that probably don't and potentially don't even want it. But in terms of the pure politics of it, it could cause big problems for Labour. Old people tend to vote and they tend to think carefully about who they're going to vote for. And, they historically, that's why they tend to get quite a lot of stuff in terms of triple locks and all the rest of it. It's because they tend to vote as a block for people who are going to do things for pensioners. And so this is something that could be seen as a sort of first test of the Keir Starmer's government in terms of, is it committed to those very big groups of voters? So it remains to be seen whether perhaps there will be a majority of people who just like, well, we don't really need this and we'd rather see the money going somewhere else to, for example, kids living in poverty. I guess that brings you out. There was also a similar decision made in Scotland not to extend free school meals to primary 6 and 7s. In this case, the SNP don't have a thumping majority in Parliament, and so have lost a vote on that. It'll be interesting to see how much that affects them going forward in 2026.
I just wonder, is this, you mentioned the free school meals thing there. So Keir Starmer's moving away from a universal winter fuel payment, and John Swinney seems to be distancing himself from rolling out free school meals to everyone in P6 and P7. I just wonder if this is like the beginning of, not the end, but quite a concerted move away by both governments from universal payments, because both governments are skint and they're looking for savings, and that's an obvious way to make savings for the public purse.
Yeah, I think, in Rachel Reeves, you've got the heat snatcher, and now, John Swinney's the meal snatcher. So there is quite a bit of it going on. But this is, we're talking about two of the most vulnerable sections of society in terms of pensioners and young children here. This isn't people who are working. This isn't people who are earning money. I mean, let's be clear here. Labour have targeted pensioners. John says that they vote often and they tend to vote en masse, but they don't tend to vote Labour, and that's exactly why they're being targeted. I get that there's people who can afford it. You are actually able, of course, you can refuse to take it. You don't, it's a benefit you don't need to take. And I think there's something to be said for, people who've spent their life contributing to, to the country to get that, that little something back. And what we're talking about here, Labour talking about a £22 billion black hole in the budget. This would raise what, 1.5 billion. It seems like a bit of a drop in the ocean in some ways. And if it was truly, I think there is a place for means testing. But if this was truly, redistributive, as Labour wants it to be, I'll get that word right eventually. But then they would, by all means, maybe take it from the richer pensioners, but make sure that it's then going to help those who are the poorest. And certainly, even if you agree with means testing it, the cut-off line that they've got for it seems a bit arbitrary. It's going to leave millions, still kind of struggling to pay their bills. Ultimately, though, I think for two reasons, Keir Starmer is probably quite relaxed right now. The first one is, as I said, pensioners tend to vote Conservative. Anyway, even Scotland, I think polling suggests that pensioners are still more likely to vote Conservative than any other party. And the other reason I think we're quite relaxed is that he is, 7-8 weeks in to a 5-year term in government. And I think that, he's probably hoping that this is, completely forgotten about. I mean, it might be forgotten about by next year. Who might have a problem with that is Anas Sarwar, because the next Scottish election isn't 5 years away. That's only 20 months away. And I think people will see this, and they'll ask the question, is Labour delivering for Scotland? Of course, it's SNP's decision to remove the universal benefit in Scotland, but I think Anas Sarwar and Labour are going to be tainted by it regardless.
Yeah, I think it's interesting what Anas Sarwar's view will be on this privately. I mean, if you take his deputy, Jackie Bailey, she's said nothing on this as far as I can see. And knowing Jackie, she has held on to the Dumbarton seat since 1999, and that's largely because her core vote would be elderly voters. She's sort of tore into Scottish Water, I think, probably because her constituents, her elderly constituents, pay water bills, they might get council tax benefit. I can't imagine she's very happy with what Rachel Reeves announced, because that will directly affect her core support in Dumbarton. Anas, if he's unhappy about it, he's certainly keeping it to himself. He probably realises that to slag off Rachel Reeves in the short term would be a bad move in the long term, because he's going to need her to open her checkbook in the run-up to the Holyrood election. In some ways, I think Rachel Reeves is probably a more important figure for Anas Sarwar than Keir Starmer is. So if they do have their doubts, I think they're tactically keeping them to themselves. Although I do think it was a bit cheeky when all those new Scottish Labour MPs voted for the cut. You saw them put things up on Twitter basically saying, if you've got any concerns about this, write to your MSP. I mean, I know that this benefit is going to be devolved soon, but, Labour is a unionist party. It's a UK-wide party. They're supposed to believe that, folk in Manchester and Liverpool are just as important as folk in Glasgow and Edinburgh, and you would expect maybe a bit more pushback and a backlash from the Scottish Labour intake than you've seen just now. It seems like so far their loyalty is to Downing Street rather than to their elderly constituents.
I think it's an interesting point you make, whether this could be the beginning of the end of universal benefits, for the simple reason that the government just doesn't have any money. There's an interesting difference between the winter fuel payment and the universal free school meals, and that there is an argument that universality is a very important component of free school meals, because there's a stigma that means that a lot of kids that need them won't get them unless it's just an across-the-board benefit. Whereas the winter fuel payment, as you say, you could opt in or out of it. really will know whether you're getting it or not. But it is, I think, it really underlines the fact that, I think we could take Keir Starmer at his word when he says he doesn't want to cut this benefit. I'm sure he's only too aware of the potential blowback electorally for the Scottish wing of his party. And I think the biggest thing that you've got to think, Douglas is absolutely right. This is a very small portion of the overall amounts of savings that the UK government are looking to make at the moment. And if you consider the furore over this, I think it really underlines just how huge this budget in October is going to be for Labour. It's going to be a massive thing to see what they're going to do in terms of both tax rises and cuts to other things that people really rely on. And we've also had today, this is a review of just the sort of future of the NHS, and I guess that's the one where people will be looking to see whether there's a feeling in government that universality also has to be looked at in the NHS, and whether people should be paying for some services there if they can afford to.
Just to pick up something you said, Douglas, about pensioners being, the most vulnerable group in society, along with kids. I mean, obviously, we can discount the fact that Rod Stewart, Elton John, Mick Jagger are all entitled to a winter fuel payment. I don't think anyone would suggest they should get it, but there'll be quite a lot of pensioners who had the fortune of retiring pretty early on in their lives, and they'll be getting a final salary pension scheme, and they've probably paid off their mortgage. I just can't for the life of me think why people in that bracket should be getting an extra 300 quid to help with their bills. Unlike workers who are in their 20s getting ripped off by private landlords and are on low wages. It just seems like a relic to me. I totally take the point that the pensioners we should be bothered about are those on 13, 14 grand who are just above the pension credit threshold. But there's an awful lot of folk in there who, they laugh about the fact they get a winter fuel payment. They're not spending it on their fuel, they're spending it on their grandkids' Christmas presents. And it's maybe going towards a holiday in Tenerife. If you support a politics that's based on need, how can you justify a universal payment like this? It just seems extraordinary to me.
But then, as I kind of pointed out, if it was based on need, and Labour were saying, right, let's means test this so we can offer more support to the poorer pensioners, then I think that might be valid. But they're just taking this money off some pensioners, and the pensioners who are still eligible for it aren't getting anything additional out of it. So it's not really helping those on the kind of lowest incomes. I think there's also an argument to be made, as I said earlier. Pensioners have, regardless of how much money they have at the moment, they've spent their life paying into the tax pot. They spent their life contributing to the country. The state pension in this country isn't great. Is it really too much to ask that they get a wee bit extra from the government? As we said, I don't think
they've had a pretty good 15 years under the Tories. I mean, the Tories did introduce the triple lock, and Cameron and Osborne, as you remember, they took an axe to working age welfare. So, bedroom tax, welfare cap, 2-child cap. It was folk in work who were on benefits that paid the price, and the pensioners didn't really contribute to the first round of austerity, I would say. So maybe there's an argument that after 15 relatively good years, that they should pay a bit more.
I mean, I'm a bit uncomfortable, that we're kind of pitting different sections of society against one another. Pensioners have done their bit. The £1.5 billion we're talking about is a drop in the ocean. Up here in Scotland, I'm going to just kind of move it away if you don't mind, but to borrow an SNP phrase, I don't think we should be taking any lessons from them when it comes to supporting pensioners. We're talking about a party whose Constitution Secretary talked about them dying as a gain for them. Just a few years ago, here in Scotland, we're talking about 160 million pounds. They could easily, I think the SNP government could easily afford that in the next budget, despite the decisions that are having to be made. There are other universal benefits that I think are far more deserving to be cut. We talk. I've spoke before about free bus travel for people under 22. You've got people under 22. I've said before, probably get more disposable income than me. You've got stuff like the baby box. Now, listen, I benefited from the baby box very, very recently, and it's great. I'm not going to sit here and say that it's not something that we've used and something that's been handy, but everything in it, we could have bought ourselves, and the money spent on that, given that to my household, I think would have been better off spent elsewhere, and perhaps it would have been better off spent helping pensioners pay for their heating bills.
Yeah, well, look, it's a view. I mean, I don't share your skepticism, Dougie, about the under 22 bus travel. I mean, those folk do not have a lot of money. That age group, I mean, many of them are on 0-hour contracts. They might be students. Compare that age cohort to the 60-plus group, who many of whom have got no mortgages or rent to pay. Surely, if you're looking at like bus travel, it would be the free bus passes for everyone when they hit 60, rather than targeting under 22s.
I think there's no doubt, is there, that there are far more people under 20 living without very much money compared to pensioners. And like you say, they've benefited from the triple lock, they've benefited from sort of baby boomer property increases in value, and I guess one of the big lessons here would be that young people should probably vote, because there are advantages, as much as they might think that there's not. Governments do listen to people who vote.
Well, that's what that's what under free bus travel for under 22s is. It's a political bribe for the SNP. It's targeting a demographic that they think is ripe for them, and the polls, and the analysis would suggest is ripe for the SNP, and it's a wee political bribe. And I'm sure they would say that all that you were talking about earlier, Paul, from the last kind of Tory governments was a bribe to the pensioners to keep coming out and voting for them. So. There's a lot of politics behind this, as well as a kind
it's almost like whatever government it is, they will just basically divert resources to people who voted for them. I mean, that's politics, isn't it?
Pretty much.
But I mean, regardless of, as I was saying at the beginning, there are strong views on either side of the winter fuel payment issue. This is not helpful for Scottish Labour and Anas Sarwar in terms of their pitch to replace the SNP in 18 months, because the SNP are going to batter them over the heads with this in December, January. Of course, the argument will be made, well, you could do something different, but this is a hard one, and I think Anas is going to be in the hook for this for a number of months, and I think it'd be in his interests if the brave new dawn that we've heard about from Downing Street and the hope and optimism was to come pretty soon.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think Anas will be worried that there's more to come. This isn't going to be the last thing that's going to look quite punitive coming from Westminster that could potentially move votes away from Labour and back towards the SNP. Of course, the SNP also have to do their own budget, which might not make great reading. So it's kind of a competition of who can make their cuts the most palatable.
Yeah, I mean, if I was to get my binoculars out just now, I think I would probably struggle to find the sunny uplands. I'd be looking for them. Is it March? Is it April? No, I mean, it's going to be well into next year, and then suddenly it's extremely close to the Holyrood election. So let's just move on. Commonwealth Games, the story that keeps coming up. I suppose the summary of it would be that Victoria and Australia have failed to deliver the Commonwealth Games in 2026. and the only game in town, if it's to go ahead, is Glasgow. We've been told that we'll get around £100 million compensation, if that's the correct word, to spend in it. The Commonwealth Games organisers say there's no need for public funds, but there does seem to be a lack of enthusiasm amongst the UK and Scottish government. I don't think they quite believe that they're off the hook when it comes to public money for this event. And so they're couching their statements very, very carefully indeed. It's almost like it's a pass the parcel game, which is what one source said to me. I don't know what you all think, but the last time we had the Commonwealth Games in Glasgow was a huge success. Times are very different now. You know, we're under huge pressure financially. We're having to make cuts north and south of the border. It would be a scaled back event with many of the key competitions that we're used to seeing in the Commonwealth Games not actually there. I'm just sceptical that it's worth it. And I do think that it could be a dripping roast in terms of scarce public resources.
Yeah, I mean, if you think last time round, we were in the depth of the conservative austerity years, and we managed it fine then, and it was a real kind of upbeat thing for Glasgow. I guess one of the big questions is also just in pure financial terms, how much of an economic benefit will it have to hold the games? Will the money that comes in to the country actually be greater than the amount that we would potentially need to spend on it? You do kind of think that how much can it cost, given that we've got all of these facilities that we built just 10 years ago to hold it the last time. I think the one thing the Athletes' Village was sold off as affordable housing. So that would potentially be an issue. But in general, we've got all these facilities. That was a great event the last time, and it would be a shame if it wasn't to come to Glasgow. I think
the difference this time is that, you know, there's only, 18-month lead-in, whereas before, I think John Swinney said today, there was 7 years preparation.
But we've got stadiums, we've got a velodrome, we've got a swimming pool. How many years do you need?
I'm just nervous that, you know, all these bodies say no public money is required, and then once you agree to it and then you look under the bonnet, suddenly money that should be going to councils, NHS, is going to be spent on a slimmed down Commonwealth Games. And I don't know.
How often are these kind of events delivered on budget? I've got to agree with you, Paul. I think when push comes to shove, public money will be spent on this. And I think there's a real argument that now is not the time for that. 2014, you know, I remember it well. It was great at the time. Looking back, I think it was probably the moment that Glasgow started to disappear up its own arse in a way. It started to get an inflated sense of entitlement and its own self-worth. If you didn't think it was the greatest thing since sliced bread, then you know, people get very upset. I remember the reaction to Usain Bolt's comments that the Olympics were better. Get people very kind of wound up, but it was good at the time. It was a good atmosphere in the city, but you know, it's a completely different situation now. And the Commonwealth Games, I think, you know, taking, you know, kind of going away from politics, I think this would be the last Commonwealth Games if they take place in Glasgow, if they take place at all. You know, they can't, as well as Victoria pulling it in 2026. I think, is it Alberta in Canada's already pulled it at 2030 as well. You know, people can't afford to, you know, places can't afford to put on these games that are good, but let's be, you know, and they've given some great moments, some great memories, some great athletes. Eilish McColgan winning in Birmingham, for example, 2 years ago was a great moment. I'm sure everyone remembers that. But, you know, we're talking about the kind of third division of sporting competition here.
It's a bit of a relic. I mean, I look forward to the Olympics, but the Commonwealth Games, I mean, with like
by the same
empire
token,
and imperialism, and it just
by the same token, John was talking about much we could make out of it. I think there was studies suggested that from the games between about 2002, I think 2002, the games were kind of get a wee breath of fresh air into them when they were in Manchester, and we had Glasgow and Birmingham, which were big events here with the Gold Coast. Delhi spent £11 billion putting on their games, but studies suggest that for every £1 spent on it, £2 was spent in the city. I don't think that would be the case this time, because I just don't think the appetite's there for it anymore. And I think people, we talk about legacy. At the time we put on all these, great transport network at the time, and now you can't get a train home after 8 o'clock at night. So, where's the kind of legacy been? The Commonwealth Village, I've got to say, is a really nice part of the city. But other than that, it seems to me that, Paul, listen, I've got to say, I agree with you. I think if they were to be held here and there was no public money spent on them, I'd probably shrug my shoulders and say, okay, it's not the worst thing in the world. But I think when push comes to shove, when the reality hits home, the Scottish and UK government would probably need to dip into their pockets. And I think that'd be a terrible look at a time where we can't afford to help our pensioners heat their homes or feed our school kids.
Well, John and I were obviously part of the Scottish lobby. We were down in London this week meeting various cabinet ministers, including Keir Starmer in Downing Street, and we did ask the Prime Minister about the Commonwealth Games, and I'd probably describe his response as cautious, maybe a little bit lukewarm, almost like he was sitting on or trying to plug a £22 billion black hole and not that keen to fund a sports tournament. I don't know what you thought, John, but the briefings we got by Keir Starmer and by Ian Murray, they didn't exactly give you much confidence that they were fully behind this Commonwealth Games in Glasgow in 2 years' time.
Yeah, I mean, the impression you got was that they would be perfectly happy to see the games in Glasgow, but that they are genuinely worried about being left to pay potentially hundreds of millions of pounds of a bill to do it. And like you say, there seems to be a lot of passing the parcel between the Scottish government and the UK government. I get the sense that one of the really big sticking points of this is the security cost, which, I mean, that might seem like a small thing, but it is something that is potentially going to cost tens, hundreds of millions of pounds. I think they're clearly cautious and would rather see the Scottish government take responsibility for it, financially and otherwise.
I have to say, one of the highlights of the trip to Downing Street was, John, your cheeky question to the Prime Minister about nuclear codes. And I have to say, I wasn't massively surprised when he refused to be drawn on the subject.
Yeah, but I mean, to be fair, I didn't ask him what to tell me the nuclear codes.
I think you asked him, were you past them when you entered Downing Street?
No. I just asked him if he had written the letter that goes on the submarines. I didn't ask about the content of the letter or anything else. It was just a joke. I
think actually one disappointing thing was that he didn't show us where the Thatcher portrait was. If you remember that story about the portrait getting moved out of his study, that would have been a nice little postscript to the Downing Street event if he'd shown us the room in which it was
maybe he's written the nuclear codes on the back of it, and that's why he's in the way. That's
what we should have asked him about rather than the nuclear codes. Probably a better response.
Okay, I think probably wrap it up. Thanks again to John and to Douglas for joining us on Planet Holyrood, and I'll see you again next week.
Cheers.
We will never turn our back on a single Scot.
We've got to wrestle with those challenges.
This is our country. Let's fix it together.
I was furious to hear about these things.